Podcast by Friday, episode 20. Here's one that I found interesting. I figured I looked up playtext. Now, this one was kind of funny.
You're on your own on this one. Go ahead, buddy.
Yeah. Podcast by Friday with Bill Griggs and Kingsley Grant. We help people to create their minimal viable podcast by taking bold action to defeat procrastination and to get their voices heard.
I'm Kingsley Grant.
And I'm Bill Griggs.
And you're listening to
Podcast by Friday.
Hey, Bill, how's it going, man?
Oh, it's going great, Kingsley. Glad to be here with you today for another episode of Podcast by Friday.
Yeah, it's really, I look forward to these moments because I think it's an opportunity for us to kind of download, I think, some things that are very important for not just our guests as our listener, but also for us to review for our own selves. I like these moments where we can basically go back and forth and share our ideas and insights that we've gained over the last few years in our own journey. And so I really enjoy these moments. So I hope today, again, we have on hand another great show for our listener.
Yeah, I fully agree, Kingsley. I look forward to getting together with you every week to record an episode of Podcast by Friday, because we never really know the things that we're going to discover along the journey when we're talking about our topic. And this particular episode that we're doing is something that we haven't really covered before in detail in our previous episodes. And it's something that everybody who's going to start a podcast needs to think about. And that is, what's the name of your podcast?
It's so funny as you're having an idea where we're going to go in this show. I was just thinking, and how my mind works sometimes, is having a baby and you don't even think about a name. And it's okay, what's the baby's going to call? Well, I have no name, really. So the first thing we always think about, what are you going to name the baby before it's born? So I just see this as you're going to birth this baby, call your website or your business or your podcast, whatever the case might be. And you have to have a name before it's born. So let's get into how we going to get that going, Bill. How do we start? Where do we start with that? What are some of the essentials that needs to go into place?
I'll tell you, Kingsley, that's a great analogy, because the name of your baby is so important to how that baby is going to develop. I mean, if you don't spend the time to think about that name ahead of time, all sorts of things could happen. Your kid could end up being named Sheldon or
Hey, Sheldon might be listening right now. Be careful. I might get in trouble.
No offense, Sheldon, but I'm referring to the Sheldon from Big Bang Theory or the name of an individual can say a lot about them. Now, your parents were obviously thinking of great things for you. They named you Kingsley. Just don't get any more regal than that.
William, really?
Yes. And you think about it, William the Conqueror, William the Great. That's a strong name.
It's you have a very good point you mentioned, Bill, because when I name my kids, I'm serious. When I gave them their name, I had in my mind something I was envisioning for their lives, and I saw them in certain capacity in life, and I'm thinking when they get there, I want their name to resonate so well, and so we just roll off people's tongue that they were going to be, because they're going to be very, to me, in my mind, they're going to make an impact in their world. And so I wanted their name to be easily remembered, repeated, stated. So I really thought about their names, and I just gave them the name that I did. And that was really, I thought it through. So I agree with you. It's very thought through process.
Mm-hmm. Now, another name that comes to mind is Norman for men. What is that? That's the normal man. Okay.
Mm.
Now there are some great Normans who have achieved great things, but there are also many Normans who didn't. And when you think of that name, I'm going to get hate letters from Normans, and I apologize in advance, Normans and Sheldons of the world. Please direct him to @Bill Griggs, and I will deal with the fallout from calling out these two names. But these are examples, folks. They're not They're not meant to disparage the Normans and Sheldons of the world. Okay. Having said all that,
I'm glad you asked it to send it to you and not to me. Thank you so very much. I appreciate that.
Having said all that, when you're talking about the URL for your website, okay, and what it is, you want it to mean something, to have a definite message that is conveyed by it. Now, in some cases, it can be just a made-up thing. But when you have let's take a really good website, Squidoo, for instance, squidoo.com. That doesn't tell me anything, but it's a fantastic service. Now, Squidoo was created by Seth Godin.
Yes.
And Seth Godin's got the chops to pull off some name that is, dare I say, nonsensical. That doesn't make sense to the average person at first blush. Okay. But choosing a name that means something, like, for instance, the name of our podcast website is Podcast by Friday. If you hear those three words together, you kind of get an idea of what our website is about. Or you can at least take a wild guess at what our website is about.
No, really you're onto something there when you're sharing about the name. And I find sometimes it may not initially resonate because, for example, when, Amazon.com or any other of those, big name brand, it may not have meant much. And I'm sure when they first started, they may have gotten ridiculed. Amazon? What's that? What does that mean? Okay, the Amazon jungle? People have made all these different things. But over time, as it began to build a brand out, which we'll talk about in a few moments about the tagline and so on, it really began to associate. It's a name associated with something like Podcast by Friday. Yes, we know it. I just said so accurately. It conveys a message, but we want to get a podcast done by Friday. Yes, but again, if a person is looking for a podcast, they may not type in Podcast by Friday. So we have to create something to associate that with. So we may not spend too much time on saying, okay, I've had the right name, the perfect name. It won't necessarily be that way. Right? Mm-hmm. It's what we're going to be doing with a name and create around the name. I believe that will, over time, make that name stand out.
Yeah. And, despite the fact that many of the major companies have names that to most people don't mean anything, like Google or Amazon or, Walmart, for that matter, Now, if you know who founded Walmart, their name makes sense. The Waltons made that, so
right.
That's great. But when you think about these names, really, what you're trying to do is convey your message to your potential audience as quickly and as efficiently as possible. So sometimes you need to choose a website that means something directly when it's read.
But also, Bill, would you suggest that? So you're saying the name, and how I look at it this way, and we have bought, and I know you have, and I have purchased even some names for website we may not even be using yet. It just sit parked there for. We may use it in the future, or we think it's a good name that could be, whatever the case might be. So we don't want to get a person to hung up on trying to figure, to spend so much time on this name, because like for myself, my name is Kingsley Grant. I made certain that I bought that when it was available before somebody else snatched it up. Mm-hmm. And I bought it way back when I had not used that name for a long time. It sat there for a couple of years. I was using other brands and so on. And eventually I decided to just kind of, morph most of what I do under my name, Kingsley Grant. So that's what I wanted to do. I want to associate what I do with my name. But I have another website, which I do for the podcast. But I realized that this person who's listening, and instead of having them to think so hard and long, we're just simply saying, as you would do as a baby, get a name that you're very comfortable with. And that really, as you're saying, is not too long. It's easily repeatable. And so start with that. And then as we talk about building content later on at some other point, that content would help that name rise to the surface, where now the name is now – it's almost like the name is associated, or there's another word I'm looking for. When you hear the name, you hear this. When you see the product, you hear this name right away. What's the word I'm looking for there? When you say, okay, I hear
synonymous.
It's not that. Thank you. It's synonymous with whatever it is. And so I want that person who's listening right now, Bill, to say, okay, I need to choose a name. What might be the best way, or what would you suggest I do? A long name, 3 words, 4 words, 5 words, 1 word. What would you suggest?
Mm-hmm. Well, I would suggest using the minimum size name that will get your message across. Now, in some cases, that can end up being quite a long URL. Or let's define URL for the absolute beginner who doesn't know what it means. It's Universal Resource Locator. That's what URL stands for. It's what you type into the top of every web browser to get where you're going, like http:// That is the URL. That's our URL. That's our name. That's our address. That's where our stuff lives. Okay. So the minimum name that you can get that gets your message across is what you should, be considering. There's scientific methods of doing that. You can go and you can do keyword research before if you really want to do that. But our show is about getting the minimum viable podcast out there. And that means you don't spend a whole lot of time on this. You may do a brainstorm session with yourself and jot down everything you're thinking about and then start eliminating.
And I think that's which you mentioned, Bill. Going back to the idea of keyword, because in our name of our show, Podcast by Friday, podcast is a keyword. It's a term that's searched all the time. So a person may come across our Podcast by Friday show by typing in podcast, and they may use another keyword. How to quickly. A very minimal way of getting a podcast. That was in our tagline, which we'll share about later on. But we're trying to put at least maybe 1 or 2, if possible, words that would be easily found and people are searching for. And in some cases, like Squidoo, no one really would search for Squidoo unless they know what it is they're searching for, right? People would not search for Google until Google became synonymous with the world, everybody, it has almost a term now, a verb, right? Mm-hmm. Let's Google it,
Yeah.
So, but when it first started, who knew what Google was? So I think it's a matter of just find what you feel best represent what it is you want to do, what it is you want to get out there, and just pick that name. And I like what Bill said, minimal, just a very short name, and then start with that.
Mm-hmm. If you want to go scientific on how you choose your name, and you want to do some searching and checking, then just go to, here's an easy way to do that. Just go to google.com, the search engine, probably the largest search engine out there, and type in the word that you're thinking about. In our case, I just typed in the word podcast, and I hit, enter. And that gave me the results of 301 million results. Okay, let's see. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Yeah, so that's 9 digits worth of results for the word podcast. That tells me it is a very popular search term. Okay, so we won't get into the competitiveness of the search term right now because that's beyond the scope of this. But the point is, we know that somewhere somebody is typing looking for podcasts, and we have that word in our URL. The chances are it'll show up on some page in Google, and it's up to us to move it up that page by doing search engine optimization and all that stuff later. But that's not the point of this episode. It's to choose a name.
So that person was wanted to get into knitting, right? And they said, okay, that's going to be my angle. I want to teach people about knitting, or I want to write, or whatever case might be. So you could probably say, okay, your name of the podcast, or your name of the URL the name of your domain you're going to choose, well, use the word knitting inside it. You could say, well, I live in South Florida or even Miami. I could say Miami knitting, expert Miami knitting or something like that. Mm-hmm. So number one, I'm localizing where I'm at. Number two, I'm using the word knitting inside there. But you could find some way of tweaking where that word knitting, is found in that name that you chose. At least it tells me right away when I search for knitting and I come across your name that you are going to be somebody who's going to teach me something or tell me something about knitting. Mm-hmm. And that way you can now choose other words around that, and you immediately have a name you could start with.
Just out of curiosity, and since I was already on the Google webpage, I typed in knitting Miami and expert. 26,400,000 results. So
incredible. I didn't even think, it just came to my mind, right? 26 million people searching for that term. Have searched for that term.
So, now whether the URL's available, miamiknittingexpert.com, remains to be seen.
Which I would not buy, by the way. I have no idea how to knit, so.
but somebody out there might, and
exactly.
Let's see what happens. Miami Knitting Expert. Well, what do you know? It's available.
So if you're out there and you're in the Miami area and you want a term and you're a knitter, go ahead and buy that right now. Mm-hmm. and choose that name, because we have found out scientifically people are searching for that by the oodles.
Okay, so we've given our listeners a basic idea of what is the bare bones way that they can zero in on a name for the podcast. There's many other details that go into this, but you already have most of the knowledge you need to choose a website. You just have to go and do it. So, like we said, think of what it is that you're going to be podcasting about and some popular words that are associated with it. Go into Google, search them, and get your results, and then try and decide that. And that moves us up to our next step, which would be seeing if that URL is available to buy.
And that's what you did just now to look for when I mentioned Miami Expert knitting, or however term you put that. Mm-hmm. So what did you do to see if that was available? And immediately, in just a fraction of a few seconds, you were able to tell me that it was available. Mm-hmm. How did you do that?
Well, there's a couple of ways to do that. One of the ways I used a tool that is available to us that we discussed in the last episode 19. You can go to podcastbyfriday.com/19 or 019 if you like 3 digits. And you'll find this episode, which discussed web hosting. And one of the things that we recommended was Bluehost, which is the hosting service that hosts our Podcast by Friday. Okay, there's 2 ways that they can search for a domain name or URL to see if it's available. And we'll tell you the hard way first, and then we'll tell you the easy way. Okay? Now, the hard way would be to type in bluehost.com and just go there and go down through their menus, look under hosting and then domain, and then type it in and then sign up for an account or whatever, and that will get you there. Now, the easy way to do that is just to go to podcastbyfriday.com/URL. And we set up a page there for you that will take you through the process quicker and a little bit easier. And if you decide that you want to sign up for a Bluehost web hosting account, you can also do that there. We are Bluehost affiliates, as we explained in the last episode. So if it's something that you need, want, and desire, you can do that, and we would get a small commission from Bluehost. Wouldn't cost you any extra, but that is just one way that we provide services and pay for our website and our hosting.
And so that was the way that and they would go ahead and get that URL, and so they want to purchase like something that we said earlier. Miami expert, knitting expert, I think it was. We had
Miami
said
knitting
as an
expert.
example,
Yep.
right?
Mm-hmm.
They just type in, when the box comes up, just type in, and you will see the instruction there. Get that, secure it, and then once you have that, what's the next step, Bill?
Okay. So you decided on your domain, you found that it was available, and it may take you a little while to search through a couple of variations of what it is you want. But in my opinion, .com is king. So if a .com URL is available, that's what you want. But there's all kinds of other ones. Once you've decided on your URL and you found out that it's available, you purchase it. And you purchase it right then. So, you push the buy button and fill out your information, and you now own that domain. Now, if you were wise, you got web hosting at the same time, and your domain came free through Bluehost, which is really kind of cool. But that's the way it's done. And you are now the proud owner of a URL. So,
and sometimes if you are there, like Miami expert, Miami knitting expert, for example, you may not find that if it's not available. You could just say, the Miami knitting expert. So they put the word "the" there will make it available to get a .com, or you could say knitting expert Miami. The point is that you want to make sure if you want to have a knitting expert as your main expression there, then you could just turn things around, add a word before it or so that will get you that .com. And once you get that, that's you can then later on, which we'll talk about in the future episodes, how you could probably do a way of rerouting that name to other things. But right now, get that name, as Bill says, secure it, and we've got that done. So you've got your domain name, you've gotten the URL purchased through Bluehost, and you're well on your way. Or are you?
Well, yes, you are well on your way. But there is one thing to consider as well. And I'm going to go off on a tangent for a second here, Kingsley. Sorry about that. The word podcast. Do you need to buy the word podcast in your URL, in your opinion? I personally don't think so. Because when you put the word podcast into your URL, you've limited the usefulness of that URL. So, for instance, we have Podcast by Friday. If we had Podcast by Friday podcast.com instead, I really don't think that serves us any. And what if we decided that we wanted to do something on YouTube or, a blog or whatever? There are ways to get that functionality out of your URL without having to buy that separate domain.
But I like the fact, though. I'm sorry, Bill. I wanted to comment on that, if I may.
Sure.
Because I think you made a very good point. Because, if you at some point have purchased this name and you wanted to make it no longer a podcast name, you have evolved and you're more blogger, you're becoming more blogging or whatever the case might be, then you're now stuck with that because podcast is in that name, and you're going to have to go back and redo this. So the brand you're building up around that name is probably gone, right? Because you have to go back and get a new name. So I really like that. A very good point you're making, Bill. That and I never thought about it in that regards, because I've seen so many people have URLs out there and the word podcast isn't it, like we have here. But I think it makes you stuck with, you have to do a podcast.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And again, podcastbyfriday.com is kind of a different sort of thing, because this is a podcast about podcasting, so it doesn't really hurt us. But, if you're knitting, if you're the Miami knitting expert podcast, then that's what people will expect. If you suddenly do the Miami knitting expert YouTube video, they're not kind of expecting to find that. So, you got to make it easy for people. So making it easy for people to know and identify your URL is one of the key things that you want to do. And one way to make that happen easily is to have a decent tagline. Now, we haven't discussed before what a tagline is, but you are exposed to them every single day. And it's basically a little saying or jingle that identifies what it is that your mission is and your in your website. So if I mention Nike to you, Kingsley, what do you think about when I say Nike?
Just do it.
Yeah, exactly. The same thing comes up when now this one's a little harder when you say
Don't stump me now.
when you say McDonald's.
Ooh, I just think hamburgers, but I mean, I know there's something else there. You go ahead and get me that because you're stumping me on these things. This is a trivial moment.
Yeah. I'm loving it.
That's true. Oh, yes, that's right. Yeah.
Or, see, McDonald's has about 40 taglines that they've used over the years. The same with Coca-Cola. Coke, the real thing. Coke, the pause that refreshes. On and on and on. There was a million. I think there's like, 40 or 50 taglines or whatever that Coke has used over the years. But, Nike is easy because, it's a simple tagline that hasn't changed in a while. And, you identify with it. That's kind of what you want to happen with your podcast. So, you look at, let's actually look at some websites and try and find their podcast. They're not their podcast. Let's look at some websites and try and look at their taglines to give you kind of an idea of what a tagline is and what it's all about. Pause. Okay, so we looked up some popular URLs from some major companies to see what their taglines were like. Yeah. Okay. And here's what would you like to go first with one of yours, Kingsley?
Yeah, let's kind of alternate if we make that might make it more interesting here. So I first start with Toyota, and it says, "Let's go places."
Mm-hmm. So, getting a Toyota, we're going to go places. That kind of symbolizes what they're after, and keeping with the automotive industry, I looked at Ford. Now, Ford's new tagline is Ford, go further. Okay. That may be, talking about their fuel economy or whatever. It used to be Ford has a better idea, but, these taglines can change over time. Next.
The next one I have is one of those very familiar, almost everywhere you go, you see. It's Kentucky Fried Chicken. Mm-hmm. It says, finger licking good. Ooh, I could have some right now.
Yeah, they've had that one going for a while. Now, this one is from Rockler Woodworking and Hardware. Okay. And it is create with confidence. Yeah. So
interesting.
Yeah.
And then we had mentioned one earlier, and I just typed it in Walmart. Mm-hmm. Always low prices have been there for many, many years. I think they're changing that now to something else, but that is what they've been associated with. Always low prices.
Mm-hmm. And let's look at American Airlines, for instance. No, let's not look at them. Here's one that I found interesting. I figured I looked up Playtex. Now, this one was kind of funny.
You're on your own on this one. Go ahead, buddy.
Yeah. It says, although we may have a common name, we are two completely different companies. Because there's two Playtex. They spell it exactly the same. There's PlayTexProducts.com and PlayTexFit.com. So I was just curious because we were looking up brand names and this one came up. PlayTexProducts.com is Playtex making every day better. That's their tagline. Okay. So that was the one I was looking for. Now, if you're looking for an 18-hour whatever, that's the other Playtex, PlayTexFit.com, and they have a different tagline as well. They have no tagline. So there you go. You're on your own.
And what we have found out is that sometimes, like even some bigger companies we saw, we didn't see any tagline, and doesn't mean that it's not there. We just didn't find it. And if we go back to our example of Miami knitting expert. So if that was your name you chose.com, and we were saying, oh, what kind of tagline would be best suited for that? I mean, we haven't thought about this. We have not discussed this yet, but I was wondering what might be something. And in my mind, I'm thinking about, okay, where I could say, where you are fitted. I'm not sure. Is it knitting always about clothing, or is it about, could be anything, right? It could be clothing. It could be, I can tell you I'm not a knitting person. So, but softness is our goal. Or, perfection, because I guess knitting is always hand done, so it's time and so on. So where you feel I just can't come up with something off the top of my head. But the point is that you get the idea is, what are you conveying through that tagline? And when I read it, it immediately grabs me and make me feel something. I need to have a feeling there, an emotion. So we're trying to direct you towards something that you can almost visualize, feel, right then and there when you hear it. For example, again, Kentucky Fried Chicken. Fingers, licking, I'm licking, good. So it's almost like, ooh, having that real nice warm chicken. So I can almost feel it in their tagline. Mm-hmm. Toyota, as I mentioned earlier, you mentioned, let's go places. Again, I feel and see myself driving someplace. So I think it's what you're conveying, the message in that tagline to help support what it is you chose as your name. That is where I think people are going to be more likely to come across you and know what you do.
Mm-hmm. It basically, your tagline should tell a little quick story about what it is that you're trying to do, what you're trying to accomplish, and make it clear for the person. It should make their decision to look further into your URL, your domain, easier, because they know a little bit about what it is. And the other thing about these taglines is that they show up generally in the description of your website when you do a search in search engines like Google. They show up as part of the metadata.
Which is really a great thing, because now you are going to be able to have that, actually being, if you're going to say, like for Podcast by Friday, for example, if we type in Podcast by Friday.com in a search engine, I'm just going to do that right now, as we know what our tagline is, but I just want to just see, like you just said just now. So I just did the wrong thing here. So Podcast by Friday, for example, in Google. So I typed that in and it shows up, and it says here in Google search, helps people to create their minimal viable podcast by taking bold action to defeat procrastination and get their voices heard. That's what comes up in Google. Now, it's interesting that this searches, over 5 million searches of that term is shown up in Google. Now, the point is that, as Bill just said, you choose a tagline that when someone type in your name, they're reading immediately and get a very succinct, summarized way of saying, "Oh, this website does this," and that's what you want to make sure that people see and can tell just by scanning through that Google search.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, CNCRouterTips.com. That's one of my podcasts. When that pops up in Google, the first thing it says is sharing tips that save us time and make us money. That's pretty cool. But the actual tagline of the website is "Cut through the confusion." But the new tagline, sharing tips that save us time and make us money, is better, because it tells exactly what we're trying to do on this website, and who it's for and what it's used for. To me, that's what a tagline should do. It should further clarify what your website's about.
It's good. Mm-hmm. So, Bill, we've talked about then how to select a name. We talked about how to get the URL, and now the tagline. We need to now then have that person probably find a way to get all this information, but much more in a concise way, and be able to take action right now. So what's our action step?
Our action step would be for them to jot down some name ideas for their podcast, and try and narrow that down. Let's get that solved today. Let's not make this a big deal, because you can change the name of a podcast. You just did, didn't you, Kingsley? On one of your podcasts. Was it that hard? No, the hardest decision was to make the decision.
Exactly.
So the biggest thing to do is to just make your decision and then just get started. And the one way for you, the listener, to go and get started in this whole process is to go to podcastbyfriday.com/Bluehost. And that'll take you to our affiliate link to the Bluehost service, which will allow you to register your URL and to get started.
We'd also like to hear from you what your decision was. What is it that you decided to do? What's your name? It'd be great to have you join us in our Facebook group at facebook.com/group/podcastbyfriday and leave a comment about what name you chose, having bought the URL. And if you need some help, as a matter of fact, and want to even email us, you could email us at podcastbyfriday and even ask us some questions if you have that. And if you need more help, some coaching in this regard, you can also reach out to us and we'll provide our service to you as well. But we want to hear from you. We want you to take action today and not put it off. But we want to know what you did and what is. You may not be perfectly as a tagline is concerned. If you want some suggestion, put it in the Facebook group. We can probably give you some feedback on what it is. We might think what may be a better way of wording your tagline and give you the help you need.
Yeah, and if you would like, you could also subscribe to our mailing list and get on our mailing list so that we can send out information on how to do this and many other things that you need to do to get your podcast launched by Friday. And that is the cool thing about this. We keep churning out information for you that helps you. And, you should take advantage of that. So to get on our mailing list, how would they do that, Kingsley?
If they go to our website, to Podcast by Friday, they'll see a sign up where they can just put their name and their email address, and they'll be right away on our list.
Fantastic. So, that's your action step. Think of what you want your URL to be and go buy it. Once you've completed that, then we can begin to think about your tagline.
Let us know what you did. We want to make sure we hold you accountable. Let's get started. That's what Podcast by Friday is all about.
Yep, and if you need help, we're here to help you. This is the section of our show where we would normally pause for a word from our sponsor. Now, if you would like to be that sponsor of the Podcast by Friday show, and you have a product or service that you feel would be of benefit to new entrepreneurs starting their new podcast, then contact us at podcast@podcastbyfriday.com, and we'll see if you'd be a good fit. Podcast by Friday. Take bold action to create your minimal viable podcast today. Check out new episodes at podcastbyfriday.com or on iTunes or Spreaker.
All right, so let's kick it off then. I'm Kingsley. Okay.
Sorry. I was just trying to get it so I chop it up.
Oh, okay. That's good.
Let's see.
That's fine.
Okay. And action.
I'm Kingsley Grant.
And I'm Bill Griggs. And this is...
And you're listening to...
All right, let's try that. All right, so You lead. I'll respond, and then you announce what the show is. Okay.
I'm Kingsley. Okay.
I gotta edit this, bro.
Awesome.